Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be at Yale, and I look very much forward to our session this afternoon. The morning one was really excellent, and I think Holmes has established a platform for what I want to say, in fact. I think just to recap, by 2070 or so, if we want to achieve 2 degrees stabilization of climate at 2 degrees, by 2070 or so, emissions have to be 0. And that means they have to peak very soon. And if they don't, and if they're 0 later, we will need negative emissions. And that is all a technology story. In a broader sense, it's about institutions, it's about technologies that we need. So I will focus a little bit about what we would need to do in the technology area to achieve the 2-degree future. We need emergence and diffusion of new and disruptive technologies. That will be the point of my presentation. But before one can contemplate the future, and I'm doing it exactly in the sense that Neil said this morning and Holmes now, scenarios, not projections. Scenarios about possible futures and what we need to do. Now, to understand the future, we have to understand the past. And here you have the dynamics of the energy system over the past. What I show here is the percentage of how different energy forms are reaching the consumer. It used to be all solid, coal and wood, non-commercial energy. Then you can see that liquids came in, 50% of them go into the transport sector, and now grids, which is electricity, gas, and perhaps in the future hydrogen. The point I would like to make is if you look at a 15, 20-year period, not that much happens. The inertia in the system is huge. But if you look over a period of 50 or 60 years, then huge changes can occur. So maybe it's possible to reverse the system by 2070. And the question is how. And I would like to show you one scenario from the Global Energy Assessment that was concluded last year with 300 experts around the world. And it involved developing many alternative scenarios, over 40, that reach the 2-degree target, but they also reach full access to energy services by the humanity, and I was really happy to see a number of posters dealing with the lack of access and how to improve that. Now, this is one of many, but it shows you that the system has to change fundamentally, really fundamentally. And many of these scenarios go toward the gridded energy because it's more convenient and cleaner. And that means lots of energy gases, but in particular, huge amount of electricity. Now, to convince you that we cannot predict a single technology, I would like to show you a graph from Granger Morgan. It shows a number of energy end uses from railways to aeroplanes, cars, information technology, industrial production. Now look how fundamental the change has been on the periods of 50 years. And in such a way that it's completely unpredictable. If you think about 1900, some of the most prominent scientists before the turn of the century said heavier than air flying machines are not possible. And we had them, and we all travel in them. Now here's a picture of how it might look in the future. I'm just putting something there to give you an impression. It can indeed be really radically different, from supergrids all the way down to machines that produce machines, that replicate themselves, self-organizing production. So I think we have to think in those terms. And so how could that happen? Well, here's an illustration, very schematic. The yellow line, if you can see it, shows an incremental current technology at that time from the perspective of 1900 that did not improve all that much. Horses and carriages are a really exciting story of technology improvement, but over the last 100 years, the improvement was not all that great. But at the same time, people were breaking their heads about how could we transform the system. There were many designs. Many of them never actually survived the first tests in the market until about 2020s or 30s. But the automobiles that started as a horseless carriage did make it, and they changed the world. But not they themselves alone, but in conjunction with the other technologies. So what we need is systems, not single technologies, we need systems. And here is an example. These pictures are more an illustration of the narrative that I would like to propose here. Here you see the same thing, the learning curves like before. This is the unit cost of the number of technologies, and this one, just to help you, on the logarithmic scale, so it looks linear. On horizontal scale is the cumulative capacity. This red curve is the photovoltaics, and we'll hear, I hope, later on about photovoltaics, but look how great the story is. Two orders of magnitude reduction in costs. Just absolutely incredible, with, of course, many magnitudes of doubling of the energy market. So that today, photovoltaics are almost competitive, but we have a number of other technologies that are doing the same thing. This corresponds roughly to 20% cost reduction per doubling of the global cumulative capacity. Now, there are two other technologies that did not experience cost improvements, so we can also forget, but not just learn by doing. And in this case, this is US nuclear and France nuclear costs going up. So in my view, this is the key issue in many ways with the acceptability of the nuclear, and I'll be interested to see your comments. So we have a challenge there. We really have a challenge that we can achieve this across a wide range of technologies, and they can converge into systems that will reduce the emissions towards zero. And so let me try to illustrate where I think the emphasis should be on the systems in the future. On the vertical scale, you see again the learning costs. So about 20 to 30% learning per doubling of the capacity for the green technologies. And what are they? They are relatively granular. They are things like memory chips, telephones, refrigerators, even cars. With those kind of technologies, you have quick lifetimes. We can replace the car fleet in about 30 years. Computers on the time scale of 5-6 years. And so these are the technologies where you can have very large learning. But if you look at the energy supply, the picture is not that nice, because these technologies change relatively slowly. So it's the infrastructures and energy supply that provide this inertia and that are inhibiting the change in many ways. But again, for the photovoltaics, that's the red curve here. They are granular. So it's one of the few supply technologies that actually can change very rapidly. Now, I will just illustrate to you how disruptive the change could be from Google. I'm not saying this will happen, but as you know, they're planning completely alternative wind technologies, and I'm sure you'll talk about photovoltaics, but really lots of different ideas. This idea I like a lot. It's under ocean storage of electricity for intermittent wind on the ocean, and we are no doubt going that direction, or platforms with wind, just like we do with oil and gas. Now, in the mobility area, it's the same. This is the car I drive, but this is not disruptive. That's the point. We have to really keep in mind, this is an incremental technology. We have replaced here the engine with the electric drive, like we have replaced horses with an engine the turn of the last century. So this is also not incremental. This is a hybrid fuel cell electric bus, but both of those technologies bring zero emissions if you produce electricity with zero emissions. So it's great. But here is a little bit more disruptive, but also fun. This is a study of Toyota, how future mobility might look like. And then we have to worry about buildings. It is possible to reduce the energy in buildings by 90%. This is a house in Czech Republic, built under the old system with planning and then retrofitted, 90% reduction. If we do 50% reduction, that's already will get us a long way toward our goal. And then we will need infrastructures. That's the toughest. This is the backbone of our energy system. I would like to illustrate here the idea of a supergrid connecting remote energy sources, whether they're nuclear or renewable, to big urban centers in Asia, because that's going to be the future hub. And then there is a magnetic levitation train. I'm a big fan of that as well. And so together with the smart grids. So you need the system, and that's the paradigm change. So to conclude, I will want to quote Schumpeter. I think he has made the point very vivid that just combining technologies, you don't get new systems. We did not go from mail coaches to railways simply by aggregation. We had to do something fundamentally different, and that these new technologies have to be nurtured. This is why R&D is a big issue, but also early investment in the market. We are investing on the order of 150 billion a year in the early experimental phase, where you reduce the technology costs very highly. That's way too little by a very, very large factor. And then let me conclude. You have seen this already. It appeared from nowhere earlier, but I just wanted to finish this by one of my favorite sketches. If you notice here, this is from 1928, the chart. In 1926, we already had steam railways. And Mr. Henry Palmer was much more sustainable. He thought that the monorail would go with hybrid horses and wind, would have been a great technology, did not work out, but the vision is right, and he was very successful. So that's an optimistic note I want to end on. He was exceedingly successful because he was the greatest designer of monorails. Of course, he shifted to steam at the end and electricity, but he had the right vision. So I think it's important to have a vision. How we get there is a more complicated story. Thank you.